I did hear an Instagram video the other day, a reel that was someone very experienced, I can't remember his name, had just said this time between 25 and 45 is without a doubt the absolute hardest, toughest time for everyone, no matter what. You come out of your 20s, everything's beer and Skittles, everything's super cruisy. You've got one decision at a time, one goal at a time, whether it's the next holiday or maybe you're going to get engaged, whatever it might be. But now there's just everything's going. So for us, why did I write it? We were looking back on our lives going, well, yeah, we're the money nerds. We can help people bring this together, but how do we help them navigate life at the same time? Because it's so crucial.
Welcome to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, the leading weekly show for Australians who want to learn how to unlock their full self, health and wealth potential. I'm your host, Bushy Martin, and each week I go deep with the best investors, experts, leaders and founders to find out what it takes to break free from the grind, discover freedom and to live by design. Subscribe now and join me and get invested in the life that you really want. Let's get started.
Hi, friend advisors. Let me start by asking you two of my favourite questions that happen to be the first ones we ask of everyone that we have the pleasure of working with. Firstly, what does your ideal life look like? And secondly, how much is enough for you? Now, many look at me strangely like I've almost got two heads when I ask these questions, or they look dumbfounded with an awkward pregnant pause as I hear the crickets and the tumbleweed in the background. Or they look a bit flustered and go, I've got no idea, I've never actually thought about this before, Bushy, and anyway, what's this got to do with money, property or investing? To which I respond, everything. Because if you don't know where you're going and how you want to live, how are you going to get motivated to invest in your future and then stay the course? And as a flow-on, how are you going to know what to do with your money and what to invest in when? Sadly, most hardworking Aussies struggle to align our money decisions with our lives in a way that ensures that we've actually got sufficient funds. But what does sufficient funds mean to you? It doesn't mean restricting yourself to a meagre existence where you're just getting by on the smelly manoli rag. Because as you're about to hear from today's returning guest, sufficient funds for you is about defining what your ideal life looks like and then creating a plan to make it happen. And the starting point is to break the shackles of conformity and comparison to give yourself permission to give society's norms and expectations the big middle finger. Because for too long, society's expectations of what we should do have pretty much set the agenda. You know, that old hackneyed unspoken and assumed story of getting a good education, getting a good job, getting married, buying a house, having kids, and then working hard from 9 to 5 for 40 years or more as you try to squeeze in a few weeks of life on holiday every year before you finally retire, and then you die. Now, I don't know about you, but this so-called Australian dream sounds more like a sleepwalking nightmare when you actually think of it like this. But life can be way more fun than that, as we all have the choice of choosing our own adventure and enjoying the journey as much as the goal at the end of the ever-elusive rainbow. Now, a lot of this comes back to the micro money decisions that we make every day that then turn into compounding habits that can lead us either closest to or further away from the life that we really want. We have to start by getting clear on what our ideal lifestyle really looks like. Otherwise, we're going to end up being buffeted from pillar to post as we chase the next shiny thing, or end up sacrificing ourselves on the altar of money as we endlessly chase money for money's sake without any clear vision of what it's for and how much we really need to live our version of freedom. It's why I go on ad nauseum about the critical triad strategy of linking your lifestyle goals, and starting with that, to then your finance goals and then your investment goals. Because getting clear on your freedom numbers, which is driven by your ideal lifestyle income, your break-free timeline and your don't have to work nest egg number, becomes both your magnet to keep you focused and excited, as well as your compass to guide your day-to-day decisions, so that your investments can do their thing while you actually get to enjoy time with family and friends each and every day along the way. And as you're about to hear, your ability to live the life you dream is dictated by two key components. Firstly, by making sound financial decisions, and secondly, by aligning these decisions with your ideal lifestyle as your guiding North Star. Now, a lot of people have a good handle on making sound financial decisions, but almost no one truly gets clear on your ideal lifestyle. Now, this means that there's not much point actually making sound financial decisions in the long run if you're not happy or end up happy. So these two key components actually go hand in hand when it comes to your fulfillment. So you need to be able to cut through the core of what makes you tick and then be strategic about how you're actually going to make it happen, which is what we're going to dive into today so that you can actually live life on your own terms with a stash of cash to create your dream life, however you decide to define it. Now, last week we started by talking about insufficient funds. So this week, we're going to help you to take your life to sufficient funds, as returning guest James Millard uses his book Insufficient Funds to help you get there. As you remember, James is known as Australia's most relatable money guy and as a financial advisor. He helps you make the life-changing shift from insufficient to sufficient funds, which just happens to be the name of his business. And I'm really looking forward to diving deep into one of my favourite subjects. So welcome back and let's get invested again, James.
Thanks, Bushy. I've never heard a better intro. Thank you so much.
Well, all the inspiration came straight out of the book, mate. So your own words come straight back at you because I was very inspired by what you shared there, mate. And it's just refreshing to be talking to someone who puts lifestyle at the centre of everything we do. In our space, it all becomes about numbers, facts, figures, and all the rest of it. But none of us have much connection to that in reality. So I guess I'd really love to set the scene to really kick into this, James, and get you to share sort of what common mistakes you see hardworking Aussies making with money investing.
So there's probably a few big ones. I think everyone's kind of used to this one, and has all been a part of it. But it's the barbecue syndrome. It's the idea of you're at a barbecue. It's a Saturday arvo, might have had a few beers, and someone just tells you that amazing investment that they've just made or they've been in forever, and it should work for you. And whatever it is, getting caught up in the hype, whether it's from someone like a mate, qualified or unqualified, what works for them is very rarely going to be the thing that works for you. Another one that we see all the time, and this comes back to the core of how we work, and the description you just gave there, is not starting with why, not getting clear on what you're really doing, why you're doing it, before you go about making financial decisions. And financial decisions, from my perspective, they should be made in line with the things you care about. And, I'm sure we'll unpack that a little bit as we go. And another one is letting tax drive your decisions. So chasing tax deductions. Everyone loves this time of year, right? How do we get a bit more tax back? Now, that's great. Everything you do should be done in the most tax-effective way. But on the flip side, it shouldn't be the driver. It should be the benefit of whatever strategy. Now, tax comes back to you because you lost money or you spent it, right? And you chose to. And it's a donation, right? You didn't lose money donating. You chose to do something that is going to make a difference to someone else, and that's a value of yours. You gave them the money. You didn't do it because of the tax, though. You've got to remember that. You get a bit of that back, not all of it. So it's like dropping $1 and picking up 30, 40 cents, depending on your situation. Don't let tax drive it.
Yeah, it's a great secondary benefit. And I know my own accountant, it's constantly said over the years, look, if you just want more tax back, Bushy, I'll just charge you more. No problems about that. You just don't have to go and spend a fortune on something, as you say, to spend $10 to get $3 back. That's a go nowhere, go backwards routine every day of the week. So I love you sharing those. Are there any others before we jump into the book?
Well, the one other thing we do see is when people are investing, they're placing a really high importance, and they spend a lot of time researching and deliberating over whatever that asset of choice is. And what they often forget when it comes to talking about tax is getting the structure right, or just choosing the entity of which to buy that asset in. And that might be as simple as saying, if there's you and a partner, does it go into their name or your name, and for what reasons? And there's lots of different ways to play that. Of course, if you're getting a bit more funky, there's trusts and other sorts of things there, but not making investment decisions with the tax end result in mind, especially, but also throughout that journey. can really bite you.
Great advice there, and a good start to the exercise, because what I really want to jump straight into now, James, is what does insufficient funds actually mean? Because we touched on that in the last episode, but can you put some shape around it from your perspective, because you're dealing with this all the time?
Yeah, I mean, look, way back in the day when this surfaced as a concept for us in our world, it was the uni days. It was the days of $0 on the bank account, on the ATM slip, and the hilarious stories that came about from that actually seeded a lot of this for where we started. We were selling insufficient funds T-shirts and hats to all of our mates at uni, and it helped fuel a bit of a road trip around the States and all sorts of other things. But when it comes to what that now really means, and really the concept from everyone we're working with, is your money and your life are not in sync. And so it's not that you've got zero, and no offense, you're all in insufficient funds until you figure it out, right? So out there, if you're, this shows up in symptoms like analysis paralysis, that idea of just constantly overthinking things, not being sure which way to go, or you're making decisions but you're tired of it. Decision fatigue, that idea of there's lots to do, moving the money around left, right, and center. That wears you down, and it might not be that helpful. Or just in many clients' cases, coming to us and they're just purely overwhelmed with options.
Yeah.
So that's insufficient funds from our perspective.
Yeah, no, I love that. I want to jump to the flip side now and get you to define what's the true meaning of sufficient funds then.
Well, everything is flowing, and you described it really well in the intro, in terms of not chasing something that someone else is chasing. This is about you. You're really clear on what you want to achieve, and you've aligned your money decisions, and you've also ticked off some really important foundational pieces. But ultimately, sufficient funds for us is everything's flowing for you. You're on track. You're making decisions. You're doing it confidently. And so you've been armed with the tools. You've educated yourself. It might be seeking the help of a professional if you needed it. Just bringing that all together, and you're moving forward, and it's flowing. You're on track for everything you want to achieve. It's not retirement, really importantly, and we might get to that one.
Yeah, I'd like to, because this notion of retirement seems way too far away for most people, and therefore I think it demotivates the action to get invested now, because it's like, I've got plenty of time, don't need to worry about that now. And as you and I know, time is one of the biggest ingredients in the end outcome. So I do want to circle back to that, but I do want to jump straight into the book, because I think when we unpack the book, it's going to make that a little bit self-evident. So let's jump into that. Insufficient funds, and the byline is make the right money decisions to bring your big plans to life. I'd love for you just to share, why did you write it? What are some of the key messages, and who's best suited to read it?
So I wrote it thinking about everything that I've been through, that we've been through, my wife and I, starting the business, starting a family, all of the fun that comes with life in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, really. And we're in our early 40s now, and I guess it's part of the idea of going, well, how do we help people navigate some of this, or whatever their journey is? And there's, it's going to be different for everyone, but so much going on in that time. I did hear an Instagram video the other day, a reel that was someone very experienced, I can't remember his name, had just said, this time between 25 and 45 is without a doubt the absolute hardest, toughest time for everyone, no matter what. You come out of your 20s, everything's beer and Skittles, everything's super cruisy. You've got one decision at a time, one goal at a time, whether it's the next holiday or maybe you're going to get engaged, whatever it might be. But now there's just everything's going. So for us, why did I write it? We were looking back on our lives going, well, yeah, we're the money nerds. We can help people bring this together, but how do we help them navigate life at the same time? Because it's so crucial.
Yeah, well said. One of the expressions I've heard is that, you're a bit like a blindfolded juggler on a monocycle with one leg, trying to work your way through the 1,000 different competing complexities that get thrown at you once you get a family and you're building a career and you're trying to fit everything else in. So I totally get that. But one thing that I loved in the book that, I'd sort of love your sort of way to break me down into easily accessible and bit of humour in there as well. But I'd love for you to start off by unpacking why should we, and I won't swear, but fire truck the FIRE movement or the financial independence retire early movement, and why isn't retirement the goal? James?
Yeah, thank you. And I knew I might ruffle some feathers with that that section in the book, but internally, I mean, we just look at the idea of FIRE, financial independence, retire early, as a concept at its absolute core. The idea is you're trying to get out of work. You're working in a vocation that you don't enjoy, and you're chasing as hard as you possibly can to get out of there. And look, to be honest, that is actually a really cool, it's a cool idea. And it's, look, can I retire early? And having the option to do that, financial independence is an amazing goal to have. And that part I can't take a lot of, I can't challenge that. We spin it a little differently in terms of sufficient funds and what we call beyond sufficient and the meanings behind that. But when it comes to retiring early, if you're working in a soul-sucking job, chasing this magical number in a spreadsheet, which is how it goes down generally, then what are you doing? You've got, even if it takes you 10 years, that's 10 years you're going to waste. And so, look, for us, the beauty of this is, I mean, that's FIRE is, and if you're listening out there and you subscribe to this movement, I don't disagree with most of it. I've got to be really honest. The FIRE movement at its absolute core has a bunch of, the extreme view is you're incredibly frugal and you're saving as much as you possibly can, 70%, 80% even of what you're bringing in for this magical day when you can finally retire. What I do see, and we get lots of people that come and talk to us who come and work with us in the end, who are chasing the FIRE idea, but in their own version. And often it's, hey, we're actually speaking the same language here. All you want to do is get some flexibility and some options in place, and you're saving money. You're not burning it on things you don't care about. That's actually very admirable. It's just about how you go about it and make sure you're still actually enjoying yourself along the way.
Yeah, that's a key bit, I think. It's not about deprivation and total sacrifice so that you're actually deferring life, actually, in the hope that you're going to get there, because there's a lot of dynamics in life that may get in the way, and that old intersection between self, in what's between the ears, health in terms of what you do on a daily basis, and then the wealth that flows out of that. If you totally put life on pause while you're scrimping and saving on and living on nothing in the hope that you're going to get there if something doesn't happen in the world that's going to shipwreck that, then gee whiz, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun to me. And I think that balance that you're talking about of being enjoying the journey and then whatever your ideal lifestyle looks at the end is just basically a content. I can't even say the word now. Continuing that, then what's the point? So do you want to put a bit more flesh on that? Because I think that's a really clear distinction. You talk about sufficient funds and beyond, but put a little bit more shape around that before I break down some of the key aspects of the book.
So, I mean, ultimately you've aligned, you're not delaying life. And so you're getting super clear on all these things. And it might be, what's happening in my world in the next 6 months? What about the next 12 months, the next few years? And usually that's a big, long list. And so, I mean, you think about on the flip side, and someone who sort of made this famous a little bit was Jack Welch, the CEO, the president of GE, famous and storied president, had all the money in the world. He had a heart attack at 70, and he was on what he thought might have been his deathbed going, I've wasted so much time. I've just been squirreling away. And he was known for, and there's a lot of famous people, Warren Buffett's another, who don't spend a lot of money. Are they enjoying themselves? I'd be questioning that, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think ultimately this idea of beyond sufficient, so once you've got all of that nailed, beyond sufficient is then saying, well, what are these huge, wild dreams? And maybe that is taking a bunch of years off to travel with a family and really connect with people, getting back to your heritage, if that was somewhere, being able to have it. Might be the dream home. It might be the fun cars. It's not necessarily that you can't do these things, but it's just getting clear on what that might look like. And then it might be a big a big plan around, well, how do we leave a big legacy here, whether it's for future generations or other causes and so forth. So beyond sufficient and is not just about retiring. It's not just what you could see as a selfish way of living is just get out of here quickly and go and live by myself or live with our little family and just do our thing, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but there are different ways to spin it.
Yeah, I love that. I now sort of want you to break down the sort of framework that I think really sums it up well in the book, and that's, can you give us a bit of a dot point summary of what your 5 days framework looks like, and then I'm going to break each of those down so that we put some shape around it.
Yeah, so the 5 Ds are the steps in place that you need to tick off essentially to achieve sufficient funds. Number 1 is define. So we've got define, declutter, develop, defend, and deliver. So they're the steps. They're the bits and pieces that need to all fall into place to be able to say you're on track or you're achieving that sufficient funds milestone.
Love it. Well, let's work through those then, because under your missing step of define that you talk about in the book, what are the 3 steps to setting bigger adventures, and why can't we have both experiences and things, James?
So number 1, and you actually mentioned this earlier, Bushy, is that idea of a lot of people don't have the foresight around what they want their ideal life to look like. So that's okay. You've got to start with dealing with you. And that just really is the idea of looking internally and doing a bit of self-reflection and really thinking about, well, what do I want to achieve? What are all these cool things? Have I forgotten? Was there, some hobbies I used to do that were so important? So dealing with you, and that's really a mindset. That's the approach around mindset. Now, thinking bigger is the next one. And this is the challenge that a lot of people have. And so you really need to force yourself through, okay, well, if my dream life was just paying off the mortgage and rolling into retirement one day, and you haven't given a lot of thought to what maybe those fence posts in between all of that look like, this is where that permission to dream is what we try and give our clients. It's like, hey, our vision for you is way higher than you've got for you at the moment. We've got to get you up there. And that's different for different people, right? But it's just starting to take those steps. So, you actually asked me a question last week on the other podcast where we talked about what would you do with $50 million? Well, that's a good starting point. It's actually a question. We use $1 billion, but we say, hey, if someone gave you $1 billion, you can't spend it. You can't spend all that money, right? So you're going to be left with something and you've got to do something with it. Well, what would you do? And that might help you think about purpose and that sort of things.
Love that.
Finally, take action now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's probably self-evident, but so talk a bit more about that.
It is really. It's just about saying, look, this is you've done a lot of dreaming, but again, it means nothing if you can't actually take a step. And so, really break it right down. Pick one thing that you're going to start to work towards, and as we all know, but it's way easier said than done. One little step, a few days in a row. And all of a sudden, that's how you create habits. That's how you build momentum.
Yeah, or if you don't have the time, then get someone you can trust to help you do it. I think that is the key bit, because I don't know about you, but I constantly go, I'm too busy, and there's always this too busy excuse. But it just, to me, means it's not important enough because you're allowing other priorities to get in the way. But if you physically can't fit it in, then find someone who has the skills and has your genuine interest at heart to help you make that happen as a consequence of that. So I love that. Let's move to the second D. What's decluttering all about, James?
So decluttering, if you take that minimalist view, it's removing the rubbish, it's removing the crap, it's removing the clutter from your financial life. And so for us, this part is about creating a really good, what we call a spending plan, and having you've got your launch pad built. And what this is about setting up those initial good habits and structures around making sure things work properly. So dealing with debt, and that's not having a $0 mortgage, right? That's fine. It's okay to have a mortgage, but don't have a lot of personal credit card, personalized, those types of things hanging over your head. If you've got that, you need to get there first and work through that. The second part of that is the key part, is what we call the spending plan, which starts with a budget. And then you're going through a process of categorizing spending. Then you've got your account structure that is set up to align with all of that, and ultimately automating that to keep your dirty mitts off it, so that you're essentially, it's all flowing and it's driven at your goals. It's driven at everything you've just defined in the first section, and then you're creating a plan around that to bring it all together.
Love that. There's a lot of boring stuff in that, and a lot of people, I talk about spreadsheets, and oh my God, that's the worst thing in the world. How can we make that fun?
Oh, look, I mean, I think if you start with the end in mind again and bring it back to, well, we actually do, we part of that categorizing part, which is boring very much, we're splitting your expenses. You're actually looking at the template, and in the book there's a QR code, and you can grab that and download this template. Essentially, it's just going to prompt you. You can write it all out. What are our expenses, and what does it look like? What does it cost to be us? When you do that, and it's the most boring part of all of it, to be honest. But once you've got it, you're then starting to split the fun from the boring. And this is where you're going, okay, well, what do we spend our money on that we get to choose? Where is our discretionary spending going? And these are the things, it's things like holidays and gifts and the lifestyle side of things. That's where that part comes into play. So yeah, no, it is pretty boring, but you got to get boring at some part with the money, because ultimately you got to find a good structure and bring it all together.
Well, the good news is that depending on who you bank with now, they actually break your spending down into categories anyway. You just got to hit a button and print it off. So a lot of the work's already done. You just need to plug that into the right thing, and that becomes, as you say, the launch pad to start looking at what, if anything, needs to change, automating. And as you say, there's no excuse for not automating and having your money management under remote control almost these days, so that the biggest problem in money is generally you. So if you can remove yourself from it, so it's doing most of the work itself, then you're a long way along the path. Let's transition now into the third D, and that's develop. When it comes to develop, can you talk to us about what you call your forward mad stacks of strategy?
Yes. So this starts with that idea of, okay, you've got your budget, you know what's left over. And really at a basic level, well, where does it go? You've got some money left over. What do you do with it? So the 4 stacks, we call them, of sufficient funds is debts, savings, investment, and super. And it's really simple. If you've got, and it's most of the time, I mean, at a higher level, most people are dealing with at least 2 of these. But for a lot of people, it's every single one of those is highly relevant. The challenge is, well, how do you get the balance right? And so, again, we talked about in that spending plan, hopefully you've dealt with any bad debt, so to speak. You might have a mortgage or a car loan. That's totally fine. But are you, with some money left over, are you funneling it into that? Are you paying more off that loan? With a savings side of things in the bank, everyone needs a good emergency or a rainy day fund. Have that squared away, have that siloed. You might want in cash your upcoming holiday or some other short-term needs for cash. And then in theory, and this is easier said than done, the rest doesn't necessarily need to be in the bank. And you're likely, depending on timing, time frame, and how long you've got until you might need that money, you're then able to take those bigger steps around investment. And that could be investing in shares, investing in property, investing in all sorts of other things. The basic starting point is shares and property is a good place to be, really, and will probably, for most people, satisfy what you need to be doing there. And then, should any of it go into super? And that's a question that's often answered with a yes, no matter how old you are, but it's just about getting that right. Yeah.
I think super gets a lot of bad press these days, and there's always, I can't do anything about it, but my employer's putting me there. I'll worry about that when I retire. But you would know better than me and most that it's actually very powerful means of funding your future lifestyle if you take advantage of it in the right way. So I won't dive into that now, but it's certainly something not to be ignored. It's a very important part of the mix. So for those that are chasing the sexy things like crypto and top lesser shares and property, but ignoring the power of the silent tortoise that just crawls along and gradually does it work over time. It's a very important foundation stone. Let's shift now to the fourth D, and we touched a little bit on this in our chat last week around the old emergency fund, which is part of that. What else is involved in Defend and when talking about our ups and downs of life, James?
Yeah, Defend is really making sure that you've got everything set up in a way that if things go wrong, you should hopefully be okay. And yeah, there's the emergency fund. We talk a lot in the book about, well, how do you come back from actually having to use that? And thinking about, well, if you are starting from, again, maybe it was a lost job or a health issue or a challenge with someone overseas, a family member, a car broke down, whatever it is, if you've chewed through your emergency fund, but you're now back on track, it's then we'll stop everything and rebuild that. The investment strategy can go on hold if it needs to, but just get that back up because that's a foundational point. And then really it's, the Defend part covers a lot of personal stuff when we talk about bringing kids into the world, for example. So it's just adding children to your life without adding a bunch of zeros to the bottom line in the cost side of things, and all the fun of fertility. And I shouldn't joke, it's not fun, and it certainly wasn't for us. But, we went through IVF, we had all sorts of challenges bringing our second child into the world, Eden, and bringing that as, I guess the goal for me was to bring that to the fore to help people go, okay, well, this is one of those times where things may not go as planned. And if they don't, what are those costs? How do we start a family? And what are the steps there involved? And that goes all the way through to daycare, returning to work, schooling, that side of things. And then really, really crucially, the least sexy part, or it's up there with budgeting, the least sexy part of financial planning is the insurance side of things, where we talk about really critically things like life insurance, total permanent disability cover, trauma cover, and income protection, and how they fit into your world. For most people, most of those are pretty relevant, just about getting a plan in place that makes sense and it doesn't cost the earth to run it.
Yeah, I love that. I want to talk a little bit more about the old emergency fund because, as I mentioned before, it gets bandied around a lot. And how long's a piece of string with this? But just as generically, for someone who's going, I keep hearing about this emergency fund, but I've got no real clue on what it needs to be for me. Are there any sort of parameters that someone should be thinking about? Well, I need to have this amount to cover this, and this. Can you sort of put some shape around that for us?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, it needs to be driven by a couple of things. It's the level of risk that you have in your world, and that might be the size of your mortgage. It might be that there are other people like dependents and so forth relying on your income. It might be that you're in a fairly unstable job, that side of things as well. And so in terms of, or there's potential health challenges, which is another thing. So an emergency fund at its absolute base level it should be driven by your expenses. And you think about, okay, we've already done the budget, looking at, well, what does it cost me on a month-to-month basis? I would suggest as a good starting point, 3 months of expenses is a good place to look. It's not driven by your income. It should be driven by expenses. And so then if it goes up from there, you're doing it because you've got more risk in your world that you're not willing to leave on the line, so to speak. Now, an emergency fund is cash. It's really important. That's not your investment property.
No.
It's not your shares. Whilst they can be an extension of your emergency, and that's really important, you can keep some cash in the bank that you've got good access to. The extension could be everything else. That if everything hits the fan, you can sell other assets if you had to. Yeah. And it's a way we've always approached things there. But yeah, the emergency fund is a critical point of it. Silo it, put it away, assume it's spent, it's gone, it's out of your life. But it is there if you absolutely desperately need it.
Yeah, and there's a couple of ways of tackling that. There's cold hard savings, or you can pawn surplus funds in an offset account that might be against the home, or there might be, if you've got additional equity there, you can set up a reserve on an interest-only basis. So if you don't spend it, it's not costing you a cent, but if the poo hits the fan, you've got quick, accessible funds that you can access short-term to get you through a rough spot. So I just wanted to reinforce that some people go, oh, well, that means I have to save 50, 60 grand before I can do anything else. Well, no, there's other ways of creating that relief valve and that reserve, rainy day reserve, without having to put life on hold until you put those biggies in the barrel. So no, that's all good. That brings us, I guess, to the final D, James, around deliver. Tell us what letting it flow means in that context.
So this is really where it all comes together, and it's where you're starting to think, okay, we've got all these foundational pieces, the strategy's in place, investments are pumping away, got our protection plan, everything we just talked about, and it's then about saying, well, what else? And so making sure that you're staying motivated. We talk about things like donations. This is something that lots of our clients are starting to talk about, is how do we start to factor that into our life if we haven't already, or what does that mean for us? And creating, it's more of a, again, bringing that life factor back into, okay, we've got the money, it's working for us, things are happening, it's okay. We've got some spare cash, what do we do with it? And that process is really about you digging deep again with you or yourself and thinking about, well, where are my true values? And is there anything else that I've missed? So the deliver process is kind of going back through, all right, it's been a little while maybe since we defined the goals and gone through all of this process, set things up, tick the boxes. Now, is it still all relevant? And this is the funny thing about life. We're reviewing a lot of our clients, financial planning clients, we're catching up with them annually. But even when we're building that brand new plan, when they first engage us, we have a couple of meetings that are sometimes they're 4-6 weeks apart. And we catch up with that middle meeting when we first defined sufficient, and all of a sudden they're pregnant, something else has happened, they've sold a property, everything's changed. Like, okay, we're starting again. But again, you can't knock that. That's the game, that's life. And so I guess really understanding that, okay, you defined things a little while ago, it's going to change, and it's going to change over and over and over again. So this is where that value, when we call it redefining sufficient, be on your toes. When you hit a milestone, tick it off, take it off the list. If it was getting married or buying the property, well, make sure you're not kind of stuck in that mode of, celebrate it. Absolutely. Make sure you're celebrating your wins. But again, then say, well, okay, what's next? And that's the idea. And then look, the book ends out with that idea of beyond sufficient that we touched on before, is when you really start to set the goals high. And we got a lot of clients we work with who've achieved sufficient funds, and most of them are on the journey. But once you've achieved it, then okay, what next? Let's really dial things up. And they're starting businesses, they're doing all sorts of fun things there.
I love it. It's putting the fun and excitement back into the whole exercise, which we've touched on a couple of times. It becomes magnetic and motivational as a consequence of that. So I love the exercise around all of that. I think it's, as you touched on as well, what's important here is that it's more a GPS, not a roadmap. And a GPS, and if we come off direction, we can track back to it. It's going to allow us to take different directions and try and test different things. So you expect that and embrace that, because life happens, shite happens. There are going to be things that we can't foresee that are going to throw us off track, or we might decide that that's not relevant anymore. Like you've just said, though, now we're having kids, we're seeing the world completely differently. Well, that's perfectly okay. Because if you've got this GPS framework surrounding it, that is at least getting you to consciously think about, well, where am I heading now, and where am I, and what am I going to do to get there, then you're always moving in the right direction as a consequence of that. So I love that. I guess what I'd love to sort of bring it all to a head then, James, if we sort of summed up the key elements to the book, what are the keys to being successful with money and life? Because it's that life to money connection that is, I think, the central theme there. Can you sort of boil some of that down for us?
Yeah, look, ultimately it's about starting with why, and you get really clear on what you want to achieve, and then you've got to take those steps. And so part of this, and if you're thinking, wow, this all sounds like a lot, well, it's one step at a time. And that's a really, really important part of, and we say it to our junior team that are joining us. And you need to think about this as the listeners at home, and thinking about your world is you've got to meet yourself where you are, meet them where they are. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about where you want to be, where you're not, or where the next door neighbor's at. Come back to, okay, well, how do I, this is how you eliminate comparison, right? Focus on me right now, today. This is where I'm at right now. What's the next step? And so it might be that you're not quite clear enough on your goals, so you need to start there. It might be that your budget's a mess. Well, then that's the next step there. Once you've nailed that, then you can start to think about investment and getting fancy with everything else and bringing it all together. So really, really critically, I think, all the points there are really important. You can't achieve, you put things at risk if you leave any of those parts out, is the way I would wrap it up. And ultimately, you pay enough attention to why and continually challenge yourself on that, then take the action, everything else. That's how you bring it together.
Love it. And the key take home for me there is start where you're at, because everyone's going to be at a different point. But if you use that framework of the 5 Ds to look at where that's at and then continuously revisit that on a regular basis, then you've really got that GPS working for you. So awesome work. It's a great read. I really enjoyed the read. Actually, I'm an avid reader. I'm one of those nerds who's always got 3 or 4 books on the go, but it was really engaging, mate. So I love writing a book takes a lot of blood, sweat and tears, as I know. So I really appreciate it. I know the book will go well, so I encourage everyone to grab a copy. What I now want to do, of course, is give you the second round of blindfold and cigarettes and hit you with the podcast. To kick that one off,
here we go.
What's your favourite quote and why, James?
Look, I'm pretty partial to Richard Branson's many solid quotes, but one I really like is fun is one of the most underrated ingredients in any successful venture. And that, apply it to life where you call your venture. You don't have to be self-employed for that to make sense, right?
Beautifully said. It seems the older we get, for a lot of people, the less fun they tend to have, which amazes me, actually. Just reigniting that curiosity that we were born with, and it's an innate part of us, I think, is just a great way to start that fun and laugh at ourselves. Turning back to the literary field for a second, and in addition to your own book, what's the top book that you'd recommend we read and why?
Yeah, a little bit more aligned to probably my world, but this I think everyone can get a lot out of is that book he's the founder of Patagonia, so Yvon Chouinard, and it's called Let My People Go Surfing. And look, what a story. The guy sold the business for a few $1 billion and gave it all away. Pretty cool. But ultimately under that, his thing was it's about the combo of doing good, but also having grand adventures.
Yeah.
And he built that into the heart of his business. And it's a book that I guess, it affects people pretty deeply when you get stuck into it. And, if you don't have to be an entrepreneur or an outdoor enthusiast to get a bit out of it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely great read. Quite an inspirational read, actually. And, just the giving nature of the guy and the caring nature, it doesn't get much better than that, I don't think. Turning back to the investment field for a second then, James, what's both the worst and the best piece of investment advice that you've ever received?
So the worst was my going down a massive rabbit hole with YouTubers around the crypto hype. And in 2021, dumped a decent amount, again, money that we weren't going to miss, but it wasn't a small amount, into a bunch of crypto right at the height. And if you zoom in at that graph, you can zoom out at the graph of the last 5 years, look at November 2021 and look at what happened. That's when I got in. And look, thankfully, we are actually back where we started now, but it's taken nearly 3 years to get there. So again, good lessons out of that one. And the best decision, look, again, it comes back to that thought of you'll never make, or the best advice. So the best advice I've received was that you'll never make as much money as you do out of the home you live in. And again, we've had a couple of stepping stones, and we've been really, really lucky timing wise. And again, I think good lessons out of that: stay in the market, be in the market, and your home will hopefully see you in really good stead.
Yeah, no, Very wise words. I'm a big believer in habits making it happen. So I'd love for you to share a personal happy habit or a rewarding ritual or daily discipline that you employ that's contributed most to your success today.
Yeah, I've got two. It's probably, and I mean, these are pretty popular, to be honest. I don't think they're very groundbreaking, but cold showers. I have not had a hot shower other than when I'm really not feeling well with a cold, or after a freezing cold surf. I haven't had a hot shower in like 4 years.
Wow.
And so waking up with a cold shower is a good one. It's way better in winter, as ridiculous as that sounds. And meditation is when I do it, and it's, I go on and off a little bit when I do it. Everything just seems to fall into place way better than it would if I wasn't.
Yeah, it's interesting. I both of those I've toyed with and coming in and out of. My wife is right into cold showers right now. She loves them. I'm in Victoria and it's cold and miserable, and there are mornings where I just I'm listening to Wim Hof in the back of my brain going, yep, I should be just plunging in here and going hard. I have found it challenging in recent times, but there's no doubt mentally, physically, in pretty much every way. There's a great way to turn on the day, and if you complement that with it,
it's a good news resolution because you get the chance to start in January when it's the hottest it'll ever be.
Love that. Awesome thoughts around that. What's one final thought that you'd like to leave with us, James?
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to what we're touching on before, but take small positive action. I know Tony Robbins is he's famous for saying the other, take massive determined action. I just like small, keep it small, just do something little and just meet yourself wherever you are and take it from there.
Love it. I guess final question in a way, if I ask you to get invested, what does that mean to you?
As a money nerd who is infatuated with the connection of life to money, it really does involve getting clear on your values, clear on your goals and your wildest dreams, and then setting the plan to start to bring the financial decisions into that.
Love it. That is awesome. For those in the audience that have really resonated with what you shared with us today, James, how can we find out more and get more involved?
Yeah, on the socials, Funds with James and Road to Sufficient. And then the website, if you want to tap that, is a great way to reach out and have a chat. So that's sufficientfunds.com.au. We'll
make sure we have all of those links in the show notes. And I know we've sort of touched on in our correspondence a bit of a special for Get Investors listeners and offering a free copy of your book, Insufficient Funds. I like people to work for that a little bit, James, rather than just because something you work for you appreciate even more. So I'm going to ask everyone to email us at hello, that's HELLO, at knowhowproperty.com.au, and give us your top money and investment takeaway that you've gleaned from our great chats with James. So that's hello at knowhowproperty.com.au. We'll have the details in the show notes as well to make that easy for you, but take some action, as James been encouraging you to do, and then I'll share that with James, and then James will decide who's the best response to then get a copy of the great book, Insufficient Funds. I'd really want to thank you for taking the time to wake us all up and motivate us to create and invest in our own version of Sufficient Funds over the last 2 episodes. Before I close out, though, I just need to ask everyone a big favour, and it's only going to take you a couple of seconds, because while we're making some big progress, currently just under 7 out of 10 of you that watch the Property Hub podcast don't subscribe. So if you've ever enjoyed our shows and videos, following the hours that myself and my support team put into preparing and producing them, can you please do us a massive favour and hit the subscribe button right now? It helps the Property Hub channel more than you know, and I promise you that the bigger the channel gets, the better the guests get, like James, and the better your investment learnings get. So, James, really want to thank you for sharing all of your wealth, wisdom in the last 2 episodes. I've really enjoyed the chat. It's refreshing to talk to someone who looks at life in the same way, because there's a lot of fun to be had out there, and money is the fuel that makes it happen, but it's not the be-all and the end-all. So, thanks for coming on board, and thanks for getting invested, James.
Thanks. Really appreciate it, Bushy. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, and yeah, what a great conversation, I think.
Thanks for tuning in to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, your home for property investment insights and inspiration. Make sure you subscribe to Property Hub for free. Get your weekly dose of Get Invested inspiration along with every episode of Realty Talk, Australia's top online property show for red-hot property investing news and insights direct from industry leaders and influencers. And finally, I'll see you next time.